Hey, thanks for sticking around. I feel like my jacket choice is disappointing now. I don't know how I'm meant to follow that. Yeah, mate, I don't know. I'm feeling the confidence that would have brought. Anyway, look, as was mentioned, my name's Nathan. If you can't tell, I am from Sydney, Australia. Quick overview. So Western Sydney Local Health District is a fairly large health district in the Western suburbs of Australia. It's got $2.1 billion worth of healthcare across 120 suburbs, and is quite large. We've got just over 1 million residents in our area, and they have an extremely diverse social and cultural background. So we have some very significant training requirements in our space. So my background, I was an intensive care nurse originally. I spent about a decade running traditional simulation-based services. And one of the challenges that we face is one I hear echoed a lot, some of the limitations related to traditional simulation-based learning of scalability, accessibility. And we'd have these really high-end scenarios, and we'd be all excited to go into a debrief and talk about, the really important non-technical skills, teamwork, communication, leadership, followership, all that. And the clinicians were really focused on algorithmic learning, drug doses, this really basic stuff that should have been the pre-learning before we came. Another challenge that we were facing in Australia was fantastic for our patients. We rolled out something called the Between the Flags program. And what that was all about was identifying signs of patient deterioration early so they wouldn't progress to the point of cardiac arrest. And following the implementation of that, we saw a significant reduction in the number of cardiac arrests in our inpatient populations. But what that meant was that cardiac arrest management became the epitome of low frequency yet high stakes events. So that led us down the pathway of how we could possibly use VR to supplement that sort of training. So this was the first application that we built. It was called ALS Sim VR, and the idea was to let a clinician practice the management of a cardiac arrest at home in the time and place that they're choosing by directing a virtual team. This is a completely asynchronous experience, so the idea was they could use it when they wanted. One of the challenges in traditional simulation is if you want to train someone in the team leader role, you bring together a group of 7 or 8 people, but only one person gets that command, that control, where they have the cognitive load on them to make all the decisions. So what we do here is we replicate all of the clinical decision making they would have to do. We built a learning management system on the back end that recorded all the main KPIs related to patient outcomes, so drug accuracy, off-chest time, confirmation of correct rates, depending on the rhythms that we're generating are all completely randomized. We can do the patient assessment. Your findings impact your reversible causes, those who are clinicians by trade, your H's and T's, which are the reversible causes of cardiac arrest. And we made it so that this would be a randomized experience, so changes every time they go through it. As part of this application, we also worked with Zoll Medical, we approached them around product placement within it, who funded some of the development. We also built task trainers around using the X and R series defib so that they could practice the skills of cardioversion, pacing, and defibrillation, which are also essential components of that training. Randomized pathologies are in there, and that's real-time scribe notes that reflect what the decisions the user has made throughout. So we built all of this. We partnered up with a team called Frameless Interactive, and my colleagues from the University of Sydney, Martin, who's presenting tomorrow as well, to start coming up with, how can we leverage the development we've done in this first application and use some of our findings to build other content. So we're built on the Unreal Gaming Engine using their approach with blueprints, which means as we get development in certain areas, it helps us to carry those forwards into other applications. So the purpose of this session today is to take you a bit through the journey of how we've made some of the decisions we've made and tried to show how we could scalably deploy VR-based education. So like a lot of hospitals across the world, we know this is a global problem. We face some significant challenges around violence and aggression in our emergency department. And one of our research partners did some really good research around staff experiences of violence and aggression in our emergency departments. So we were then tasked with joining the working group, and we did a huge revision. It's called Code Black in Australia, which is a threat of violence or aggression against a staff member. And we did a bunch of interviews and observations, and we went through a whole restructure of our entire system, from traditional education, drug choices, EMR solutions. And we were tasked with viewing how we could potentially support some of this training with virtual reality. And there were 3 key findings that came out of the user experiences that we thought aligned really well with VR-based solutions. The first was patient restraint. So staff expressed that they were not prepared the first time they saw the physical and chemical restraint of a patient. It's an extremely confronting experience. So what we did is Martin, who has a history in film directing and We hired actors and we filmed from the perspective of a team member, the physical and chemical restraint of a patient. And as simple as that was, it's been a really powerful experience, and one of the more powerful experiences we've had, where we're taking that as part of the rollout. Everybody gets that shared experience and we can debrief against it. And if anyone's interested in this, please contact me. I'm happy to send it out. Just due to the sensitivities of some of the content, I won't be playing the videos today. There's a lot of swearing and things like that, but they are quite confronting by design, but I'm more than happy to share it with you if anyone would like to see the content. The next part was people saying they felt like it came out of nowhere. And one of the ways clinically we wanted to address that was the implementation of something called the BOC chart, Behaviours of Concern chart. And what that is basically an end-of-the-bed assessment that lets us say, okay, this patient looks either a bit aggressive, or they're getting increasingly verbal or physical threats, things like that. Anyone who scores a 2 or greater results in a medical review. And that was a clinical tool being rolled out. Well, knowing how simulation and virtual reality could allow us to move to that from remembering to understanding to application phase, we wanted to look at how we could use this tool in VR. So what we did is we filmed an emergency department. We asked each actor around, there's 8 beds all around. They each took a turn doing a 10-minute scene while everybody else stayed pretty still. Then what we did in post-production is isolated each of those 2-bedded segments, sliced them into 1.5-minute vignettes, went through, graded each one of those with the BOC chart, and then set up the experience so that when the user clicks go, the experience is it automatically selects a random one of those quadrants, automatically splices them together, so we get a randomized interactive 360-degree video. For the few guys who nodded, I was pretty chuffed when we worked out how to do that. But so what we did is we're able to leverage the learning management system that we'd built previously. So when the user has finished this experience, so they have 1.5 minutes in a randomized video, they make the selections, and we can feed back to them what they got right or what they might have missed in that assessment. Now the next part was staff saying they didn't feel like they were prepared to have the conversation with an aggressive patient. And this is absolutely our most experimental piece. I've made the last-minute call. I won't play the whole video for you because he starts swearing at me really quickly. But basically what we have in here is a AI-driven conversational agent. So we are using OpenAI to create patient personas in the background. And what we do is the user experience, you put it on. These are all metahumans that we've now rigged up the animations with. The user gives a verbal interaction with the patient. There is speech-to-text interpretation, which is done with Google Speech-to-Text. That text is then analyzed for intent. That intent, if it would be de-escalatory, will decrease the frustration level of the patient. If it's inflammatory, it increases the frustration score. That frustration score then aligns with different animations on the conversational agent. And then based on the backstory that we've given the conversational agent, he comes up with an unscripted response. Now, when we did our first studies in this, and I've got some publications that we've done around this, we were actually using the AI to script out the conversation, and we use similar to like a dialogue flow model. But what we found, and the feedback from the clinicians with those early iterations, was it was a very cyclical conversation. Clinicians tended to say similar things and so get similar responses from the conversational agent. So now what we're doing is we have direct access to the AI. Now, that's been a double-edged sword, because in one way it's given us some really nice randomizations. On the other side, it makes for some really interesting conversations at times with it. So what we're trying to work out now is how we put those rails on to keep it pedagogically sound and actually meeting the educational outcomes that we're looking for. So for example, I was presenting in the UK for the Giant Festival end of last year, and I did this recording. And I needed to get, I wanted him to get a really good recording. I wanted a really nice translation of what I was saying. And it kept, there's little bugs here or there or whatever, so I kept having to restart him. I thought, no, stuff, I'm not going to restart him. What I'll do is I'll annoy him, and I'll just start the screen record again. I was like, Louis, you need to sit down and shut up. And he goes, why would you talk to me like that? I said, oh, because I need to get you angrier. He said, why do you want me more angry? I said, oh, because I'm presenting you at a conference in the UK. And he said, no, I don't want to go to a conference. Oh, you're not going to a conference, Louis. I'm going to a conference, Louis. Anyway, but then what was really cool is we've got the rails on. He's like, well, can we stop talking about this and talk about my dad? Which is the purpose of this interaction, is this patient, he's trying to get his dad seen because he's been waiting for a long time in the ED. So, sorry, let's skip over that. Some of the other use cases that we've been exploring. So yeah, just back to my narrative there, so that we needed to incorporate that microphone access as part of that. So that then took us back to getting microphone access for the ALS scenario I talked about at the beginning, so that we could start to look at actually recording the clinical handovers that were given at the end of it. And I'll jump back to that in a minute. Martin and I had the pleasure of working with a bunch of students in the University of Sydney on a project around dignity in the workplace. We wanted to explore what it would be like to experience something from somebody else's shoes. So the students went out and interviewed staff and observed things and heard about unprofessional behaviours they'd witnessed in the workplace. And then what we did is we recreated those for them in VR so that they could test them out against one another. And what the experience was the user would have the interaction, they'd press a button, they'd be in the other person's shoes, and they'd look back at themselves and they'd see and hear exactly what they said and how they said it. The main one always stuck out to me was junior female medical officer who had a senior male medical officer say to her, "Why are you worried about learning all that? Surely you'll be pumping babies out soon." So horrendous interaction, obviously. So the experience was you put the headset on, no matter who you are, you're in the junior female avatar. Senior male medical officer standing in front of you who says that, would play with height differentials and things. And then, they respond to it however they wanted, push a button there in the other person's shoes looking back at themselves. It was a really powerful experience. We got some great feedback from the students around it. A couple of really interesting insights from particularly young, strong males who were just they found that perspective quite eye-opening. But what it led us to think about in this same structure I'm trying to paint the picture of was how we could use that core modality, that core approach in different contexts. And now we're starting to explore things like breaking bad news. So telling people, tell Mrs. Johnson her husband just passed away and how you're presenting yourself with that. Some clinical communication stuff, which I'll jump to in a second, as well as the junior medical officers are asked about interview practice as actually preparing for some of their stuff as they progress through their training. So the ALS scenarios we built, obviously they're focused at a slightly more advanced level of clinician. So it got us wondering about how we could support more junior staff at the bedside. So we're building a module at the moment focused more on undergraduates and very junior nursing and medical staff around the identification and escalation of deterioration. So this is not about clinical treatment. Obviously there's a lot of grey areas in medicine, how we make decisions to manage our patients and things. But what we wanted to do was basically let a clinician practice. So in Australia, we use what's called an A to G assessment. It's a head-to-toe thorough patient assessment approach. Basically giving them all the resources to stand at the bedside, talk to a patient, and perform a structured patient assessment, document their findings, and then if their findings were concerning, escalating those to somebody else. So calling for help, so identification and escalation. And that led us to this piece, which in the beginning, what we were doing, once we had that microphone access, we were recording all the verbal interactions that were occurring and basically doing learner self-assessment. So the user could play it back to themselves while reviewing their performance and saying, "Oh, geez, that's what I said," or "I should have said this," or whatever. But because we were doing textual analysis for our verbal de-escalation trainer, it got us thinking, well, can we analyze the text we're giving in these verbal handovers? And in Australia and a lot of our other areas, we use an ISBAR framework for our handovers, Introduction, Situation, Background, Assessment, Recommendation. And what that led us to realize, if we're controlling the scenarios we're presenting the users with, there's no reason we can't do an assessment to not just have that learner self-assessment, but actually give them some quantified feedback against the handover that they gave. So didn't translate great on this, but the idea is you can see over there we've got a transcription of the verbal handover given. So the experience is we present them with some user information on the side, patient information I should say. The avatar in the middle says, "Hi, I'm the nurse coming to take over. I'm the doctor responding to the advanced life support call," or whatever it might be. You then discern the appropriate information for that interaction. You give a verbal handover, and then we give you quantified feedback at the end. So under the assessment, you forgot to mention a tachycardia or something like that. So at the moment, we've got this built as a standalone trainer, which is just part of the suite of modules we've developed to put all together. But the idea being is once we've refined it, and again, it still needs some refinement, none of this is perfect by any means, but once that's refined, the idea will be plug it back into the ALS and the other areas where handovers are occurring so we can make it a more holistic flow through the process. Look, the way we've gone through this, so obviously I mentioned at the beginning I'm currently a PhD candidate, so we've done a fair bit of research around all of this. Won a few different awards as we've gone through, a couple of international conferences, which was really cool. Being here today is absolutely a career highlight for me, so thank you so much for listening. We were, quite clever with Zoll. We approached them from a product placement perspective and they partnered up with us, so they funded a lot of the development. When they saw their DFIBs in there, they went, "Oh gosh, this is amazing, what else can you use?" So we built the trainers. They saw the trainers and said, "Oh my goodness, that's amazing, what else can you do?" So we've actually isolated the trainers out, and now in Australia, Zoll Medical have purchased headsets and they're taking the DFIB trainer, the task trainers out as sales and marketing tools. So all their sales reps have headsets to take out with them when they go to do sales and marketing. We were successful. We got one of their Epic Unreal Mega Grants. and they've approached us again about supporting us again. We won in New South Wales. We have what's called the Premiers Award, so this is the state leader. We were finalists for that last year, and that's probably enough from me. Thank you.